case, and we will jump right into it.
Perfect.
You just bought a new house. You're so excited. You're doing all kinds of work, putting in central heating, putting in new carpeting, and you want to put in a wall sconce with a light on it. So you make a hole in the wall, and as you look in the wall, you notice something unusual. You see a box. It looks like an old lock box. It looks like it's got to be at least 60, 70, 80 years, and you know that the previous owners were only there for probably 5, 10 years. You pull out the box, you take a hammer, you bash it open, you open it up, and it's full of gold coins, probably worth thousands and thousands of dollars. The question is, does it belong to you? Does it belong to the previous people you bought the house from? Or do you have to try and find who originally put it in the wall? And I will add that the previous house owners also did not know about it. So do you even have to tell them? So again, those are the 3 options, and nobody, you and the previous owners didn't know about it. I assume they would have said something if they did. Let's say that's a fact. So either you can keep it, or it belongs to the previous owners because when you bought the house, you didn't know about it. And how can you buy something you don't know about? Or you have to try and find the original owners. So which of those is the right thing to do? And then we'll look at the halachic / right thing to do. So I open it up, just throw up your hands. Yeah, Ken, go ahead. And then Lynn.
I have a question that may be similar to that. Suppose you
please.
bought the house, and instead of finding something in the wall, you decided you needed to put in a well water because that's the way you were, and you struck oil. So that's a little bit more than 80 years old. It was there, and so on and so forth. And is that any different that because it was part of the same property, you bought it, you buy a house, you buy it lock, stock, and barrel, and it's not as if, another question, because we were talking about this at supper time, which was, I was a little late. So what would happen if you bought the house and then you found, open a closet and clearly someone forgot to clear out the closet, it was the previous owner's clothes, then are you obligated to return them? Or could you sell them, through a chattel place or what have you?
So those are all excellent questions. I think we will answer all of them tonight. But to clarify, one of them is a box of gold in the walls that was clearly hidden and no one knows who it is. Do we have to try and find the original owner who owns it? 2 is you find something that clearly belongs to the previous owners and they forgot it. They just forgot about it. And 3 is something that nobody knew about in the first place. It was on the property, but it never belonged to anybody, or at least not knowingly. That's a key there. It never knowingly belonged to somebody. So those are 3 different cases, but again, we'll answer all of them. So you can answer my original question. You can take a crack at Ken's additional ones. And again, they're all connected. Once you get the principle, it'll help answer. So, Lynn and then Elizabeth. Yeah, Lynn, you had?
Well, I would imagine in Ken's example, and then an example I'm thinking of, there are going to be legal issues. All right.
Be specific, yeah.
With a commodity. Can you drill for oil in the middle of a suburb? I guess you can if you're in Texas.
Yeah, well, so let's say that, again, obviously with all these cases, it's like with science, you're talking about in a vacuum. So let's say in a vacuum here, you could drill for oil or something like that. That wouldn't be an issue. The issue is, let's say you're allowed to drill for oil and you decide to do it. You find it, the previous owners are like, oh, that was ours. If we had known about it, we wouldn't have given you the house. Like, is that a valid thing? Elizabeth and then Gloria.
Well, maybe it's the same thing if you discover gold coins that could be antiquities. Do they revert to the state? Is there a claim of ownership from a prior owner who wasn't aware at all?
Well,
because in England, the value of the find sometimes has to be adjudicated by English Heritage, I think it's a quasi-governmental body. Some of the find might belong to the finder, might belong to the landowner or the state.
So it's interesting, and there might be a difference here, at least in Jewish law, between whether the gold was, if it's in the walls, it was clearly put there by an owner at some point, versus if I go into the middle of the Pacific Ocean and I find gold doubloons from a famous sunken ship that's in like the middle of nowhere, that might be different. But so really good questions. Yeah, Elizabeth and then Gloria.
My thinking is, I'm going back to the gold in the wall.
Sure.
That legally it's yours. you signed on for the house, you know, without any stipulation. If they had put in the contract that you signed, that if they come across some antiquity coin, gold coins,
Right.
it's not yours. But once you sign, you sign. But ethically, it really might be the right thing to try and trace it back and see who the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren are. But you know what? That's really opening up a can of worms.
I'll tell you before we go over to Gloria is that I won't say who, but there is in my family someone's grandparents who have now since passed away, who indeed told their child, who is still alive, that there was gold hidden in the house, which has been sold for probably 10 or 20 years now, but this person forgot where it was. So I don't know if it's still hidden or if they found it and decided to keep it. But this happened, you know, in my extended family. But you said two very important things that we'll come back to. One is legally it's mine, and again, the sources will kind of give us the language and the foundational ideas for why it would be mine and not the previous owners. And the second thing you said is not legal language. You said ethically it might be the right or good thing to do to try and find the owners, but you certainly don't have to, and maybe it might be messy to do so, but it's very good the way you worded it. You opened it up for us. Gloria, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in the case of gold in the wall, someone did put it there, and so that makes it different from Ken's scenario where the oil is in the ground. Previous owners didn't put it there, you know. So I wouldn't say if you were allowed to dig for oil like that and you were the first one, I don't think you would have to go back to previous owners of the property.
Excellent. Very good. Yeah, any other thoughts? Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, there was just, we thought an excellent film that came out, I think on Netflix, called The Dig.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I heard about that. Yeah.
I just saw that.
And like Glenn said, though, something like antiquities like that, in England at least, there is, I believe, a common law, or some kind of law where you may find it, but, you know, or even here with maritime law, when you find gold doubloons in the, you know, in wrecks off of Florida, for example, there's different levels of who gets a cut, and whoever discovered it spent years and years trying to find it. If it is, when I was younger, I remember all the scuba diving names, you know, names who did that. You know, they had to fight very hard to get even anything out of, you know, what they uncovered.
No, it gets very, very tricky. So a little bit of background before we go into the sources, and then once we share them, because it's only three sources, we'll have more time to kind of talk about it more. There's a few issues that come up here. One of the most fundamental ones is a commandment, a mitzvah from the Torah called Hashavat Avedah, returning lost property. Now, one thing that we could get into, it's really a class in and of itself, is this obligation is if I find something lost,
Return it.
I have to return it. And there's exceptions that I'll mention some in just a moment. One of the things that is important to the rabbis is it might only apply between Jews, meaning that if I know that the previous owners of the house going back 1,000 years were never Jewish, I don't have to, according to Jewish law, return it. Now, again, there's some debate there, but what everyone agrees, and this might be connected to Elizabeth's statement, it's the right thing to do. And there's a famous story in the Talmud of this king who loses something. And he says, whoever returns it to me in 7 days, I'll give them all this wealth. And this rabbi finds it, and he waits for 8 days. And he goes back and returns it. And the king says, how long ago do you have this? I had it 5 days ago. Why didn't you return it and get the reward? And he said, I didn't do it for the reward. I did it because it's a nice thing to do. And the king says, praise be the God of the Jews. And it becomes a kiddush Hashem, a way to sanctify and praise the Jews. So even though we may not technically have to return this gold in the wall, if the house never belonged to Jews, it may certainly be the right thing to do. So that's fact one. There might be a mitzvah, but it probably doesn't apply in most cases. However, let's say it does. Let's say the previous owners, it's in Israel, and you can probably assume the owners were Jews. Do you have to in every case? Like if I'm walking around the fairgrounds here in Milwaukee and I find a Bic pen, you know, just a very cheap little pen on the ground, do I have to pick it up and say, did anyone lose a pen? Did anyone lose a pen? And the short answer is, I don't have to. And some of the factors, again, if it was in the middle of WITS, in the middle of a yeshiva, where everyone is Jewish and they're all scholars and everything, then maybe I probably would have to. But if it's in the middle of a place where mostly non-Jews, technically I don't have to. And again, this sounds very, racist is not the word. This doesn't sound like a good thing. I'm just saying the way the law developed, but it is absolutely the right thing to do to return property. But there's another reason that I wouldn't have to return the pen. And
The worth.
what? Part of it is
The
the
value.
worth. Yeah, is if somebody drops a penny, or I'll do two of them. One is, can it be identified? Is there any way for me to ever actually find the owner of it? If somebody's walking by with a pad in their hand standing next to me and they're looking around like, where'd my pen go? Where'd my pen go? Okay, that's one thing. Again, maybe technically I don't have to do the mitzvah, but certainly I would say, sir, ma'am, did you drop your pen? So is there any identifying mark that would allow me to return it? So if it's a penny and there's nobody around looking for a penny, I can keep the penny. The value is relatively low. But the other factor of it, and this might be, again, value, like if it's $1,000 bill, and even then, you know, if they can tell me the serial number, that's one thing. But the other thing is this: there's a concept in Jewish law called yeush, basically despairing or giving up on something. So if I'm on Fisherman's Wharf in NorCal, and I drop my favorite sweater or my favorite scarf into the ocean, I'm not getting it back. And I have probably in most cases, I've given up on getting it back. And if somebody's in the middle of the Pacific or middle of the Atlantic, and they find a scarf floating there, it is fair, and this is key, we've said this before, most people would assume, and that's key, most people would assume that whoever lost it has given up ever finding it. And assuming they were a Jew in the first place, and it could be identified, the fact that they probably given up on ever finding it means it's now ownerless, and whoever finds it first gets to keep it. So I'm going to repeat that again. A few factors here. One, did it belong to a Jew? And again, in most of these cases, maybe it didn't, or if it did, then it might be a little different. But in most cases, it probably doesn't. It's the right thing to do. When a non-Jew loses property, we don't have to. And the second one is there any way to identify this? If you find a box of gold doubloons, the answer is probably yeah. You could probably say, did you lose something on the wall? And they're like, yes, 50 gold coins worth this much money with a picture of, you know, one-eyed Jack or a pirate on it. So those are usually identifiable. But the third thing is, can we assume that whoever lost it has given up on finding it at this point? And that may or may not be true in this case. Someone mentioned about the grandchildren, like I said, in my family, maybe hoping they'll find it one day. So those are the factors on whether or not we can just keep it, or whether we must, according to the Torah, go out of our way, or whether ethically it's probably a good thing to do. But if we find something that there's no way for anyone to claim it's theirs, no way to identify it, and it's clear that whoever put it there, it's been there for 200 years, so whoever put it there is dead and certainly gave up, then there's really nothing wrong in Jewish law. We'll see that in the sources, with just keeping it. And then the other question that we'll really come into in some of the sources is, can I claim that even though I never found it and never knew about it, it was mine when it was in my house? Because if I sell you a box and it's on your house and I call you on the way home like, oh my God, I dropped my iPhone in there, I know it was in there, I knew where it was, the person can't say, oh, it's mine now, it's in the box that I bought. That's ridiculous. But if I live in a house for 50 years and I had no idea there was gold in the walls, no idea, can I claim that it was mine? And there's a concept, and again, all this will come up in the sources, called kinyan chatzer. Literally your courtyard acquiring for you. If something is on your property, it's as if it comes into your hand. But does that apply for things that you don't know about, or you would never find in the normal course of events? Like if I, in the top of my closet, easily would have found that box of gold, even though I didn't find it, it's probably mine if I was living in the house before. But if it's hidden in my walls and I never would have found it unless I did work on the house, and that was unlikely, it's really hard to say. that it ever would have belonged to me. So the rabbis will spell this out more in the sources. But I'll open up the sources. And before we start reading them, are there any questions on those ideas about when you have to try and find the original owner? And again, we'll look more into what does that mean if it was in my walls and I never would have found it. So any questions just on what I said so far? Excellent. All right, Elizabeth, I'm going to have you take the first source, and it's from the Talmud, but it starts with a Mishnah, and it's really relevant to our case because it talks about finding something in the middle of nowhere and whether or not you can just keep it lock, stock, and barrel, and the context where you find it becomes very important. So go ahead, Elizabeth.
If one found lost items in a heap of stone rubble or in an old wall, these belong to him. If one found lost items in a new wall from its midpoint and outward, they belong to him. If he found the items from its midpoint and inward, they belong to the homeowner. If the homeowner would rent the house to others on a regular basis and there was a steady turnover of residents, even if one found lost items inside the house, these belong to him. Since the owner of the lost items cannot be identified based on location, he will certainly despair of recovering his lost items.
So just pause on that sentence, which again, the unbolded text is commentary on the Aramaic and the Hebrew in this case. And it says if there's no way to identify the original owner, you can assume that they will have given up on finding their lost items and finders keepers. Basically that is if there's no way, like again, if this is like a rented property, they're talking about people come and go constantly, like a hotel room or something like that, and you find something hidden in the wall, you know, that again, that might have been there for a long time, but there's no way to find, I guess today it'd be different. Because with hotels, you can just look up the records of who stayed there. But back in the day before they had that, if it's like I don't know what the equivalent would be today, maybe a hostel or something, where people don't give their records. They just come in, pay the money, spend the night and leave. And you find something hidden in the wall. There's no way to track down which person stayed there in the last 5 years. So whoever finds it might be able to keep it. Please go on.
The Mishnah teaches that if one found a lost item in a heap of rubble or in an old wall, it belongs to him. The sages taught in a Baraita, it is to the fact that when the owner of the heap or the wall claims the property, the finder can say to him, they belong to the Amorites who lived in Eretz Israel before it was conquered by the Jews. The Gemara asks, is that to say that Amorites conceal items, but Jews do not conceal items? Perhaps it was the homeowner who placed the item in the wall or in the heap. The Gemara answers, no, the Baraita is necessary only in the specific case where the item is extremely rusted, indicating that it had been left there for a long time.
Excellent. So this is very much like our case. So I'm staying in somebody's house and I find something in the wall. And again, the homeowner did not know about this. He bought the house or she bought the house with this thing hidden in the walls. And again, if they had found it, it wouldn't be an issue here. That's it. We're talking about a case where the homeowner had no idea about it. So I am the first one to find it. So what they're going on here about is he can, the homeowner can claim, oh, that's mine. And what I can say is, no, it's totally ownerless. First of all, it might have been, maybe it was put there by non-Jews, so we don't have to, I don't know if this is so much about the Jewish, non-Jewish thing as the Amorites were like an ancient nation that existed long before the Jews. And it's saying here, look, Jews hide things in walls too. But the point is, if I find something on the wall that's clearly very old and before the homeowner, then the homeowner clearly didn't know about it. It's been hiding in his walls. And again, he probably would not have found it. That'll come up, I think, in one of the next two sources. So when he bought the house, and this again is a fundamental thing, when you buy property, you only take ownership of, and this is two things, what you're aware of or what you will likely find in the regular course of living there. I'll repeat that. When you buy property, you only take ownership of what you're aware of or what you will likely find in the regular course of living there. So if something, let's say that, well, the house I have now is, it's not, we don't own it anyways, but let's say we find in the backyard, 25 feet underground, a box of jewels, the previous owners here, unless it's clear they put it there, it's very hard for them to be like, oh, that was on our property. If we had known about it, we would have found it. Well, you didn't know about it. So it was never really yours. It continued to be ownerless outside of the regular rules of ownership. So Ken, I think this kind of, even though this is, oil is a little different because it's not really property that anyone ever owned, I think this would kind of answer the oil question. Had the previous owners known about the oil, it would have been a different case. But because when they bought the property, they were unaware of the oil, it's hard for them to claim, that it was theirs had they found it. So really here, you could either claim according to local law, which might protect you, is when you buy a house, you have everything in potential oil, or you could just say, they didn't found it, we did. And as long as nobody owns it, whoever finds it becomes the owner. Anything that is ownerless in the eyes of Jewish law, whoever finds it owns it. And finding it can either be you actually find it, or it's on your property in a place that you'll probably stumble upon it through like an old cabinet or something like that. I've lived in places for a couple months and we were cleaning out a closet and found, an old plug back there or something like that. That was ours. That became our property. So before we go on to the next source, any questions up until now? And this has kind of given us our answer. Beautiful. Okay, Gloria and Leonard, I'm going to unmute you. And now what we have is the Tosafot, which again, this is 12th, 13th, 14th century. This is over several hundred years, written by the French and German schools that were founded by the family, students, and grandchildren of Rashi. So this is Ashkenazi texts that were direct commentaries on the Talmud. And here it's a little stilted, just the translation I found. But one of the things it's going to go into here that I mentioned is if something just pops up on, if something happens to be on my property, at what point can I claim that it being in my house is the same as it being in my hand? So Gloria, go ahead. And I'll again, it's a little stilted, but I'll help make sense of it as we go.
The owner of the rock pile or wall is Hatzer.
Hatzer literally means courtyard, but basically is property. Again, if somebody leaves behind a jacket, so one of you comes over for a Shabbos meal, hopefully in the next year, and one of you leaves your jacket behind, does it automatically become mine because you left it on my property, etc.? Please.
And should acquire the Avedah for him. A Hatzer does not acquire something that it is possible that it will never be found, like here, that it is hidden in the thickness of the wall.
So apart from the code here, again, the idea is if something, again, I could buy a property, 50 people could buy it, keeps turning over, and there's gold hidden in the walls and nobody's found it. It's clearly hidden in a way that no one's ever going to find it. It's buried under the foundation of the house, and then they put cement over it. So unless somebody's fundamentally like digging up the house and redoing the foundation, most people are never likely to find it. In that case, it does just the fact that it's on someone's property, it doesn't automatically become his. And the code's not a good example either because it's identifiable and and you're Jewish and I can find you, etc. like that. But again, something really hidden, gold hidden in the walls, probably will not be found in the regular course of events. So if I don't find it, then it never becomes mine, and my Hatzer, my courtyard, doesn't acquire it for me. Please continue. And then it's going to bring a few sources.
A Mishnah says that if one found coins in a store or money changer's room, he keeps them. The Hatzer, property of the grocer or money changer, does not acquire for him because the coins are small and they are not destined to be found.
So that's interesting and obviously some of these contexts are a little old. Money changers, we sort of have that, but let's say you walk by like an ATM machine and someone dropped they took out money and they left $1 on the floor. That might be the modern equivalent. And this source would, say like it's unlikely that the owner of the ATM machine is coming by every hour to collect up all the money, et cetera, like that. Or if you're outside a bank and you find a few pennies. Now, again, it might be the right thing to go back inside and say, I think somebody lost their money. And I've done that before. And I know people who do that before outside a bank. You find an envelope with $1,000 in cash. The bank actually probably could find out who took on an envelope with $1,000. But here we're just talking about places where money is constantly going in and out and in and out, and you find a few small coins, not like a cartoon money bag with a dollar sign where you could probably find the owner. We're talking about a place where there's constant turnover, and it's a small, insignificant thing that it's impossible for either side to claim it's theirs. The money changer could claim that it was money coming to him, and a customer could easily say it was money that he took for him. There's no way to identify it. And whoever dropped the penny or a few small coins probably gave up on it. So in this case, you could keep it. Please continue.
A Mishnah below says that if Reuben bought payros from
So this was probably payrote fruit. Not probably, it is payrote fruit.
from Shimon and found coins inside, Reuben keeps them. Below it says that he keeps them only if he bought from a wholesaler. We do not say that Shimon acquired them when they were in his property.
So if I go to you, Gloria, and I buy an apple from you for $1.50 and I find an engagement ring inside, that's probably not, I should probably be like, did you lose an engagement ring? But if I go to Trader Joe's and I buy that thing of peaches, I can't wait till they come back, the delicious ones, and I buy like 5 things of them that's equivalent to 50 peaches, and inside I find a coin or something, like, which would be weird and I should return them. In that case, I could probably keep it because it's hard to say who it came from, how did it get there, et cetera, like that. But the big idea here, again, going back to our original case and all the cases we talked about, is there any way that the previous owner could have even known about this? And the answer is, if there's no way for them to have known about it, and also there's not really a way to figure out who it belonged to, then you can certainly keep it. So the last, before we go on to the final source here, any questions on what Tosafot adds to the conversation? He just kind of helped clarify for us, what does it mean that your property acquires for you? Excellent. So Leonard, I'll let you take the last case, and this is great because Rambam in his Mishneh Torah basically talks about our case pretty explicitly. So please, Leonard, and then I'll continue on to the next page.
Since a person's domain can acquire property on his behalf without his knowledge, as will be explained, why does the owner of this courtyard not acquire the treasure buried within the old wall, even if it originally belonged to the Amorites? And thus, he would become its legal owner.
So again, this is great because it lays out our 2 things here. There is an idea that when I buy property, wholesale fruit, or a house or something like that, or someone loses something on my property, it's as if it was in my hand because I own my property and my property owns whatever is on it. But here we have a case where if there's something hidden in I own this house, I own that wall. I could knock down that wall. It's my wall to do with as I please. Shouldn't I own everything that happens to be hidden in the wall? And that's, as we've seen, the answer is because I never would have found it, so therefore it was never mine. But that's the question that the Rambam is asking. So please, the rationale.
The rationale is that the treasure was not known about by him or by others.
Okay.
Thus, it was lost to him and to all others. Therefore, it belongs to the finder. Our sages derived this concept as follows. With regard to a lost object, the Torah, Deuteronomy 22:3 states, quote, "This is lost by him and found," quote, unquote. This refers to an article that the owner lost, but others can find, thus excluding an article that fell into the sea and is lost to him and all others. Surely this applies to an ancient treasure that the person never owned. It is certainly, quote, lost to him and all others, unquote. Therefore, it belongs to the finder.
Excellent. So there's 2 parts to the acquisition of property that's lost. One is it being lost and one is it being found. And what it's saying here is it doesn't, as long as it's lost and completely lost, it doesn't belong to anybody until it's found. So if it's in my wall and I don't know about it, it still continues to be lost. And meaning nobody has taken ownership of it. The Torah is clear until it is found. And just saying that if I had known about it in my wall is not the same as having found it. Knowledge, my awareness of property is a factor here. But again, we'll talk one specific thing there is, even if I don't know about it when I buy the house, if it's something that I'll probably stumble across, then we can assume that it is mine. But if it's something that's completely lost, as if it was thrown into the sea, meaning it's unlikely that anyone will ever find it unless they're a deep sea diver. And again, if it's buried in my wall, my finished wall, nobody's going to find it unless they go out of their way to do so. That's why it's still considered lost. So again, a box of treasure in the back of one of my closets, we're going to find it eventually, even if it takes us a couple years. But a box at the bottom of the sea may stay lost forever. A box inside of walls may stay lost forever. And therefore, it continues to be ownerless and lost until somebody finds it or until the end of time. So that's important. When I buy the house, the previous owner can't claim, oh, it was mine if I had found it. No, you didn't find it. It didn't belong to anybody until I did. And then the question about, do I now have to, I don't have to, the original owner, he never owned it. Nobody owned it. So it's the same as, again, it's the exact same as me going deep sea diving. And again, Lynn, maybe you were mentioning certain laws and about if I find like coins of King Richard the Lionheart or something, maybe there are laws in Britain, or if I find bones of a great king in my parking lot or something, that might be different. But generally, if I'm in the middle of the ocean and I find a gold coin and it's in international waters, I don't think I have to call a museum. Maybe I'm wrong. So that's what this box is basically like. So the previous owner, it's impossible for them to say it is theirs. However, it clearly belonged to somebody at some point. So do I have to find the owners? And again, technically, according to the commandment of the Torah and the rabbi's understanding, if I know that the house has always been owned by Jews, there might be a mitzvah there to do it. And if it was never owned by Jews, I don't have the mitzvah. But in both cases, the question is it the right thing to do? And that might have to do with, could it be identified? Box of gold, yes. But is it likely that whoever originally owned it is still looking for it? And if I know my house is 50 years old, and I know that the original owners are alive and living in Florida, Jewish or not, it still might be the right thing to give them a call. But if I'm living in a synagogue that is 4,000 years old, I guess it belongs to the community, and it's unlikely that whoever put it there several thousand years ago is still snooping around for it, then it can be considered the mitzvah no longer applies, and whoever finds it owns it. End of story. So what we'll do now is I'm going to open it back up to questions. So Lynn, I'm just clicking on me. You just have to click on your side. And others, yeah, please follow up more challenge questions. And let's.
The found object could be the fruit of ill-gotten gains. Al Capone stashed stuff all over the place that people are still looking for. What do you do there?
Well, so that's an interesting question. Again, this goes to a little bit on about the laws of lost objects and about there's a whole chapter, laws about finding or buying stolen goods.
But you don't know. You just knocked the wall down. You just bought the house, and oh, look at this.
Well, so that's why the laws of whether it's identifiable and whether you can assume that whoever originally owned it has given up on finding it. And again, there is a little bit of the factor here about do I as a Jew, am I commanded to find the owner? And if it, Al Capone, can you assume that it belonged to a Jew at some point? And again, that shouldn't be the deciding factor, but that is part of the story here. But again, if I find it and there's some evidence that the house belonged to Al Capone and I can trace it back, again, maybe I don't technically have to, but maybe I should. But again, this is why it's a little bit case by case basis. Because again, if you find it and it's very clear that it was put there by the previous owners, and the Talmud kind of gets into it, based on where you find it in the wall, you can maybe figure out how long ago it was put there, or who might have put it there. But if it's put in a way that it's clearly 80 years old, if there's a court out there that would say, if you find Al Capone's hidden treasure, you got to give it back, I'd be very surprised about that. I'm sure they'd be happy to get it back. And again, if it's like a Mona Lisa or something like that, it might be a different case. But again, I think context, and it's a little bit of a case by case basis. I find like a giant treasure chest hidden, underneath the floorboards of my house, and it's clear that it was put there by a pirate who stole from a local family. That's slightly different than somebody who lived there 100 years ago, had a little bit of their savings, forgot about it, and died 20 years ago. See, again, it's not necessarily a clear thing, but that's why you have those factors How long has it been there? Would the original owners of it have given up? And by the way, when you're talking about Al Capone, I'm guessing that whoever Al Capone ripped off now, even if they, that's the thing, even if someone would love to get their property back, that's not the same as them giving up on getting it back. That I should have clarified that earlier. Yeush doesn't mean you wouldn't be happy to get your stolen Rolls Royce back. It means you've given up on finding it again. And the moment that a person has achieved Yeush, they've despaired of it and said, I'm never going to see my Rolls Royce again. I don't know if anyone even drives it. Do they even make them anymore? I'm never going to see my car again, my Volvo, whatever it is. That property becomes ownerless legally in the eyes of Jewish law. So that might actually be the response to your Al Capone thing, is I'm sure they'd love to give it back, but they've accepted that they're probably not going to. Not that there's 0% chance, but they're pretty much given up on it. Certainly, Al Capone's dead. I think he's dead, right? Yeah, he's dead.
Oh, yeah.
But whoever he's stolen money from, and also it's very unclear because his money probably didn't necessarily go into a bank. I mean, he did. Well, he didn't. He did whatever it is. He may not have directly stolen gold coins from somebody. He probably did illegal things and made money. So it's very tricky with ill-gotten gains. So that's why it's very important to have the principle of have the original owners accepted that they're never going to see it again, as if it had fallen in the sea. And that's the thing. If a ship that's holding money, a bank ship, you know, don't really have those, is blown up in the ocean, unless we have some, people are like, oh, that's gone. If somebody wants to go in the ocean and find it, good for them. But I've given up that we're going to get that back. That's an important distinction there. Yeah, Ken, please.
Yeah, I think with the ocean stuff, there's maritime insurance, and usually that pays for whenever that was lost. But then there's antiquities, like Lynn said. But what happens, for example, and this is a true case. So when I looked at it tonight, I said, gee, do I really want to come into this? The first house I had in Milwaukee was a very old house. It was empty. It was part of an estate. In other words, and it was only one family and their kid that owned it. There was no offspring. The previous owner died. The place was empty for 4 years. I think after I was in it for a couple of years, it was a big old house on Newbury. I could give 2211 if you want to go look at it. And finally, when I was brewing, because it was such a big house, I was putting my brew stuff in a closet in a basement. And way in the back of the closet, I found a little pint bottle of bourbon. Well, who does it go to?
So I remember you telling me this story, and I think we actually have the tools to answer it. So I'll ask you a few questions, which I think you sort of answered. Was it hidden in a super secret way, or was it something you would have found? Because you did find
something
it.
Anywhere. Man, I can make a scenario that some workers put it there. You know what I mean?
So because it was obviously, in an obvious way. Exactly. So first of all, whoever the previous owner of the house, it definitely belonged to them because it was in a place where they could have found it. I'm sure they put it there. So now the second questions here, which again, I think we have the answer for, is you said the previous owner passed away, correct?
Yeah. No heirs.
No heirs. Okay, then it was ownerless. It was hefker is the Hebrew word for it. It was hefker. It was totally ownerless, and you found it first. But let's say that there were heirs, and they had gotten everything from the estate, but that had been missed because it wasn't hidden in a crazy secret way, and they had it clearly intended to find. Someone talked, maybe it was you, Ken, talked about somebody just forgot to take some old boxes. My sister said this in her house, I think that she's in now. The previous owners had left a couple boxes behind. It was in a very obvious way, so it clearly belonged to the previous owners. And it was, obviously they wanted it, and it was identifiable with all of these factors. And it was pretty clear that they would not have given up on it because it was something that it was easy for them to find. Now, whether they were Jewish or not, whether you have to do the mitzvah, putting that aside, it's the right thing to do to call them up and be, I found some boxes, do you want this? So in your case, had there been heirs who went to the house before you, which is pretty common, gone through and happened to miss something, it would have been the right thing to do. Now, if they were Jewish, it would be commanded. But regardless of where they were, it would if there were heirs, it would be absolutely the right thing to do. A good Kiddush Hashem, to call them up and say, hey, I found this bottle. It might be worth something. Do you want to come pick it up? But in your case, again, we have all the tools. It did belong to the previous owner, but they passed away. It's totally ownerless now because there's no one. But had there been heirs and it was in an obvious place and they would have taken it had they not missed it, then Again, based on whether or not they're Jewish, you either must, or it'd be a very good thing to give them a call.
But I guess in this case, versus your sister's case, you know, there's an immediacy. This was, you know, 4 or 5 years, because the house was empty for 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
you know, after the fact. But in terms of heirs, you know, the house, quotes, belongs to an estate. So whatever anyone specifies or not, you know, it goes somewhere. So
Yeah, well, this is where you get into the whole, at what moment is considered ownerless with the previous owners. Yeah, so let's say there were heirs, they went through the house, but then the house just sat there for 4 or 5 years, and then someone buys it and says, oh, I know it was 4 or 5 years ago. Clearly you didn't know about this, or probably didn't care about
Right.
this. I found this. So the question is, in a rabbinic court, would they say, look, they weren't going through there because they assumed they got everything, but had they known about this or given a second look, they would. And that's again where you get into the, you know, a little bit of gray area, and where you would have a rabbinic court make a decision. And there may be clear case law in that, like about how long does time make a difference in Yeush and despairing of it. And probably it does. You know, something that is clearly very old and hasn't been touched in years, we can assume that the owners forgot about it, don't care about it, and moved on. And again, I'm not giving a direct ruling here, but those are all the factors. So, and this is good lesson for life. If you find something in a place where, and it's very common, people are constantly going through, it's impossible to identify the owner, whoever lost it. They may be sad they lost it, and they may wish they had it back, but if they've probably, and that's very key, they've probably accepted they're not going to get it back, and they've accepted that fact that they're unlikely to see it, and you can assume that they'll think that, then you can take it. And again, few exceptions. If you find a pen inside of a yeshiva, the rules are a little bit stricter. And again, the laws about with Jews, and it's a Jewish town, are important. But again, that's only whether or not it's commanded, or whether or not. But in terms of it being the right thing to do, that's what class was mostly on tonight. Is it likely that the owner knew about it? Is it likely that the owner cares about it? How old is it, et cetera? And that applies, I think, in the ethical conversation either way. So Elizabeth, your thing about, if I find it, it might be nice to track down the grandchildren. It depends on, are there grandchildren who you know, are easily accessible, you know, things like that, and would they have ever found it? So any other final thoughts, comments, or questions? Yeah, Deborah, please.
I think it's interesting that in our country, the law favors the landowners, that I agree with Elizabeth that it wouldn't be the ethical thing to do to keep it. But the law is, you know, whatever's in your house, whatever's on the property goes to the purchaser unless it's specifically excluded in the contract. But that's different than what it's stated in the Talmud, where there are these exceptions.
Yeah. And it has to do with,
like it's more consumer friendly.
yeah, and again, it has to do with what knowledge and what you're likely to find. And when I buy a house, if there's something that I have no idea about, you know, in the house, et cetera, like how can I say it's mine? So it's very important that contracts are, you know, very clear and stuff like that. And the mitzvah of returning lost property is a beautiful one. And it's one that all of you have probably either done or had an opportunity or will have an opportunity. It's a very common one, and it's great. And it's nice to know. And again, whether it's Jew or not Jew, it doesn't matter. It's the right thing to do. It's nice to know that if you lose something really important, that's really special, like a monogrammed purse, that there's a whole people out there who, like, they have this ethical compulsion to return it. And whenever I find anything, which is not that often, certainly during COVID, my first thought is always, is there a way for me to find the owner? And again, I go through those questions, and if it's clear that I find a buck in the middle of the street, there's no one around, generally what I'll do is just give that to charity. If it's $10,000, we'll talk about that, maybe 10%. But again, if you find $1, no one to find it, I think Jewish law would support that. And I don't think there's anything unethical about it, but it's nice that Jewish law gives you these reasonable, logical tools to kind of ask through to figure out whether the owner cares anymore. Not that they wouldn't love to see it back, but if they accepted that it's gone. Yeah, Deborah, please.
So on January 1st this year, I was at Bloomingdale's in New York. And as I was leaving, I saw on the floor, there was a diamond ring.
Oh my.
And I picked it up
Lift up your
And-
hand. Are you wearing it right now?
No. And the security guard said, "Oh, what do you have there?" I said, "I just found this." I said, "Is there a lost and found?" He said, "Oh yeah, he'll take it to the lost and found." So he put it like on a shelf, and I went, to the outer doors, and I looked back at him, and then he put it in his pocket. So I went back to him and I said to him, I'd like to take it to the lost and found personally. So, and I think he realized I saw him do that, and he readily gave it back to me. So I went up to the lost and found, and, delivered it there. And the two men behind the desk at the lost and found, it's like they were looking at it, coveting it as well. I don't know what happened to it, 5 minutes after I left, but, but that was a very interesting experience. I'm wondering, I think I did the right thing, but like, what would the Talmud say about that situation where you find something not in the property, but, well, maybe that's like, well, I don't know, I'll let you talk.
Yeah, no. And again, there's whole books and there's whole sections written on returning property. I want to commend you for what you did, because regardless, again, whether it was commanded or not, you essentially were doing several mitzvot. One of them was trying to return lost property, and the other one was with that guard. You rebuked them. There's a commandment, a mitzvah of tochecha, which is when someone's doing the wrong thing, to tell them they're doing the wrong thing. And not only that, but it seems like that security guard was receptive. So it's beautiful that he accepted that he did something wrong. So there is a question about how far do I have to go to return lost property? One of the questions is, let's say that in order for me to return something lost, I know the owner is, I have to get on a plane and fly to Timbuktu and fly home, and it's going to cost me $5,000 to return this thing. Does the person I'm returning it to have to reimburse me for it? And often the answer is yeah. If I have to, take off a few hours from work and I'm like, look, I lost $50 to return this to you, they might owe me $50. So today it's usually easier. We can put it in the mail, or we can call them or send an email, and they can pick it up on their own dime and on their own time. So what I would say is that because the common accepted custom of the land is that lost and found is a safe and acceptable way to do it, meaning the fact that those guys in lost and found may have been unethical, that's not on you. In fact, even with the security guard, I guess as an ethical Jew, one would say that you saw wrong and you should have stood up, which you did. But there's a point at which they're like, look, you have to, at some point, you've done what everyone else is expected to do. You don't have to go above and beyond. You don't have to climb Mount Kilimanjaro to bring somebody back their scarf or something like that. That is, going too far. So in your case, everyone would accept that putting something in a lost and found, especially jewelry in a store that sells jewelry, I think Bloomingdale sells diamond rings, that what you did is entirely appropriate. And more importantly, let's say it was Bloomingdale's in Jerusalem, run by Jews. Everyone in town was a Jew. So you clearly had a mitzvah, because it was definitely belonged to a Jew at some point. I think many would agree, if not all, that you did fulfill the mitzvah by bringing it to the lost and found, because that is a way of returning lost items. And they're probably more equipped to find the owner of it than you are. So in that specific case, because it's accepted in our society that lost and found is a legitimate way to return lost property, I would say that you did your due diligence. And the fact that that security guard, you caught him in the act, rabbis would probably say, going above and beyond, which is a good thing for people and Jews to do. And the fact that those guys in lost and found were coveting it, that might be saying, well, do you have to stand there? Do you have to take off from work? And by the way, congratulations. I heard that you worked on a really cool video. I heard from Ruach. I'm going to say something about that. Anyway, I just saw it today, so kol hakavod. If anyone doesn't know, you'll know, because I'll say something about it in the newsletter. But do you have to take off from work from a week to sit in Bloomingdale's and handcuff yourself there to make sure that those guys return it to the right people? No, I don't think anyone would say that. And again, that's a question. How far do you have to go? So I think you already went above and beyond, but you certainly did what the mitzvah would have required of you. But again, there's so many, it's kind of fun to learn the laws of lost property, because it's a mitzvah that comes up a lot.